Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Wendy, Korbusieski, and we're looking at a passage from Psalm 82. So this is a fascinating passage that I found myself reading a book and going down a rabbit hole, and a few years back, it started over the first part of Job. That's what got me down the rabbit hole. And so the Hebrew word Elohim can't be translated as God, or it can be translated as God or gods. So unlike English, what governs whether it's a proper noun or should be taken, whether this proper noun should be taken as singular or plural is dependent upon the verb that's connected with it. So the statement, God presides over heaven's court, contains a singular verb in Hebrew. Therefore, we understand this sentence as a reference to God, the one and only God. But in the next phrase, the heavenly beings are plural, and it could also say little gods or other gods. It's other Elohim is what it is. So the setting of heaven's court would indicate that God's pronouncing a judgment upon the judges and leaders who carry out his judgment. So the heavenly beings could be a reference to angels, but in the context of the psalm, it probably more likely means that this is a metaphor for the judges of Israel. And what got me down this rabbit hole was this whole concept of a divine counsel that God has a conversation with, and it could be that as well. So in Middle Eastern languages, Elohim can translate a wide variety of phenomena, cosmic enemies, demons, kings, or even dead people. So Elohim has also caused questions in verse 6 and 7. So some scholars and even other religions outside of Christianity have interpreted it to say, you are gods, you are all children of the Most High. Well, I don't think he's indicating here that we're all, that human beings are deity. Verse 7 distinguishes these gods from the one true God, or from angelic beings, because these gods can and will die as all mere mortals do. But the psalm portrays God standing in a courtroom setting, addressing the judges and the leaders of Israel. This setting portrays God as a king, and the setting would have been a familiar one to the people of Israel. The irony is that God is standing. Normally a king sits, normally even a judge sits in the courtroom case, right? But it says normally the king sits and his council and judges would stand as they discuss other important matters. The king stands only when he's delivering a judgment, or if he is arguing as a protagonist concerning a certain issue. So the psalm is picturing God as a judge or a prosecutor. And the leaders of Israel here, it seems, are being warned. They should recognize that this heavenly court has been convened concerning their behavior, and God is standing in the midst of the court, challenging them concerning the manner with which they have carried out his judgments over the people. And we arrive at some important applications for this psalm. One, God's leaders represent him, and that's still true today, right? Their actions, their decisions are intended to reflect God's judgment, their love, and care for his people. Two, God's leaders will answer to him. Leaders often fear and cater the opinions of people or the masses of people, but godly leaders should be concerned primarily with how he evaluates their leadership. And the key groups that are noticed in this psalm reflect the values that leaders should uphold. So rather than prioritizing the opinions of influential people under their leadership, God's leaders should be concerned about the condition of those who cannot benefit this leader personally: the poor, the orphan, the oppressed, the destitute, the helpless, those who are in the grasp of evil people. So, Wendy, God measures things in a different way than we do. And how do you think our evaluation of leaders differs from God's evaluation of leaders?
Our evaluation is kind of limited. I mean, we only have the benefit of what we can see them do, what we can hear them say, how we feel based on their actions or their impact, or how others respond to the things that they've done, or how they lead, or how they've benefited from their leadership. So they're just all outward evidences of their leadership. That's the only thing that we have to base our evaluation on, because we're not God. But God gets to peek behind the curtain. He gets to see people's hearts, their motives. And so his evaluation is a lot different because he knows the story behind the story. So we only get to see sometimes what people want us to see.
We are moved by certain things in general. Charisma, probably more by charisma than we really want to admit. Right. As a matter of fact, I think we tolerate things that we don't like because of charisma at times. And we will even overlook people's track record because we like, so as you listen to this, you're a week away from a presidential election. And my experience is it doesn't matter how a person votes, right? They get in the political season and they're going to say what appeals to the people. Typically candidates move to the center in a national election. So they tend to move toward center, even though that may not be their natural, that may not be what their votes or history has told. But we're moved by words a lot. We're moved by looks, perceptions, talking about politics most of the time. Like, we'll see how this plays out. It played out that way the last time we had a woman candidate for president. And I think the man-woman distinction is a challenge, a different challenge. But when it's just been two men, the overwhelming majority of the time, the tallest one wins, right? And that is a visual perception, right? That's one of the reasons Saul was chosen.
Right.
It wasn't because he was the most spiritual or the most godly. It was because
he demanded presence.
Right. And God even tells Samuel that, right? When he goes to get David, he says, you look on the outside, but I look on the heart.
Don't be fooled.
And I think there are people from time to time, having been around long enough, I wouldn't have said this 30 years ago. Life is much more nuanced the older you get. But I've seen people do things that, if you're going to scale it on a black and white scale, is this right or wrong? Some of the things they do are questionable in my mind. And the same probably for me. There are people probably who would look at that as well. But I felt like I knew the person's motives, right? I felt like I knew what they were after. And then there were other times where I saw people doing the exact right thing, but I didn't think their heart was in the right place. And my personality, I'm a much more gut instinct. Okay, I'm going to follow my gut,
Right.
And there are times where I would much more likely be lenient to someone who has done something worse.
But you knew their heart.
Right. I felt like, okay, I kind of got a feel for what this situation is, versus somebody who's done on a, and whether we like it or not, we all have a sliding scale, and culture even has a sliding scale. And they even in the prison systems, they have a sliding scale, right? But who wouldn't even register on the scale in many places, but their heart just didn't seem to be right. And I think we have to be better at measuring those things. I think it's a challenge for us. We don't know.
Right, because it's easy to evaluate the performance.
That's right.
And sometimes that's exactly what people want you to see. Because if they can perform loud enough and, well enough and fancy enough and with all the flashing lights and whistles, you don't have time or the desire to question the motive. And that alone should give you reason to pause.
So why should we put more emphasis or be aware of at least? Maybe I don't know if we should put more emphasis on it. We could debate this, right? Or at least I would be willing to. But why should we at least pay attention to how leaders treat marginalized people?
I think it gives you a peek into that person's heart because you get to see how people treat those marginalized groups. Are they treating them like a chess piece? Is it to gain advantage in the game? Are they just a piece to move around in the game? Or is it, am I treating them as truly as a brother and sister in Christ, as a person created in God's image that I need to help? Because there's nothing that those people have to offer other than their gratitude. There's nothing that they can lend to them that would be of a direct benefit other than some maybe popularity points.
I'm always nervous about wading into politics, but there's a. I can't. Well, I'm going to say what went through my mind because what went through my mind is horrible. But so there's a presidential candidate, and I assume he'll still be alive by the time this podcast comes out. Even though
Lord willing,
been a couple of opportunities to take him out. All right, so I told you it's not always healthy to get inside my brain. It's not debatable that there is evidence that he has mistreated people at different times in his life.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also some examples where it appears he has gone out of his way to help people who were marginalized, paying off somebody's house, that was hurt in an automobile accident, and it is in those times, right, that you go, how do you reconcile? How do I feel this? How do I feel about this? There are people in my life right now that I esteem highly. And one of the things that they will say frequently is you can judge a leader based on how they treat the person who can do nothing for them. Mm-hmm. Right? Do they stop and give time to people who have nothing to offer, right, at that particular moment? Not all the time. Listen, it would be foolish for me to think that there aren't times I need to have a conversation with people who are going to have some personal benefit for me. It'd be foolish to say that.
Right.
But it would also be foolish for me not to discard those people, right? And discard people who can't do anything for me. So you watch and see, one of the things that I watch for, like when we interview people, one of the things I'm paying attention to, we always go out to eat. I want to see how they interact with that waitress. Mm-hmm. I want to see if they complain about their meal, right? Because like I'm giving away some trade secrets here. I don't talk to anybody about, but like if I was going to interview for a job, I don't care what you brought out, I would eat it. I mean, I would eat it and smile, but because the last thing I would want them to think is, okay, he's a complainer. He don't appreciate what we brought to him, those kind of things. So I'm watching to see, right? Are they appreciative of the service they're getting, those kind of things. And, I have a friend that will send their food back 80% of the time. Something's always wrong with it.
Oh,
and
I've worked in food service. You don't want to do that.
No,
public service announcement.
I don't send my food back.
Don't.
I mean, you got to have sent me the wrong thing,
food,
and they got to go. Yes, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. They got to recognize I ain't sending it back. I used to know a guy growing up. He did it so he could get his food for free. But I'm going to get sidetracked here. Yeah. But you watch those people, right? How do they treat a waitress?
Right.
How do they? We don't have bellman here, the doorman, but, I've traveled with people and I've seen people be ugly to Uber drivers and bellboys and room service staff. And that is an indication of who you are.
Right.
Right? It's an
Yep.
indication of who you
Yep.
are.
It's a little flag of what's bubbling in on the inside. It's just, what's in your heart will bubble out through your mouth.
Is there anything like that you look for in people to see?
Yeah, but who was it? If I say the wrong a leader's name, I'm going to get it wrong. But it's somebody way up in the leadership world who, if they sit down to a meal and immediately salt their food, they won't hire them. Who is it?
So it was either Rockefeller or
I can't remember. Yeah,
the steel guy.
Carnegie.
Maybe have
Yeah.
been Carnegie, but that was his rule. Like if you salted it before it tried,
before you tried it, right?
Yeah,
It's that same concept.
You're looking for tails,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is this person ever satisfied? Are they willing to try it, or do they automatically presuppose? I'm always curious to see how. I'll give you an example right now. I went to lunch with my son today. And there is a particular person in town. I won't say their name. But if we are in religious circles, they're not a pastor or anything, but they are a player in town. And I'm probably going to make some people mad. But if we're in like a church setting or something where churches would be making a significant role, this person will make a beeline to me and just go out of their way to speak, but if I'm in public, they will go out of their way not to speak. And today, they came to the table beside of me and went out of their way twice not to make eye contact so they didn't have to speak to me. And that, for me, that's a tell, right? If if I had a dislike of, I cannot believe I got here today, but anyway, if I had a dislike in this community, it is the haves and the have-nots, and you've got to walk in a certain circle and do a certain thing and act a certain way and go to certain things to be in this circle. And I'm not made up that way. I don't really care, right? I want that person to come to my church if they want to. You need Jesus, get saved, but I want the person who was strung out on drugs last night, showing up at the same time. And I do believe we will be judged when we spend all of our time. That was I guess I've got more to say today, and I realized that was something. I remember having this debate with my dad when I first started following John Maxwell. And my dad said, I like him fine. He said, I just disagree with the way he presents some things. So one of the things that John promotes is, you deal with your influencers, you talk with your influencers, you influence your influencers. And my dad said, but what about the lost sheep? What about the lost coin? What about the lost son? Right? They're not the influencers. They're lost. Who's doing that? Now, having been in John's circle enough over the years, I know how that works out, and I know that he is concerned about that person too. And but I do think we can lean too far to where we ignore the people who can't do us.
You're right. Nothing to gain.
Yeah. Whether they're poor, marginalized, orphan, outcast. This morning before I woke up, somebody sent me a message about a former convict. And they said, do we allow these kind of people to come to our church? And I said, well, I was like, exactly what should we do with them, right? And it caused them to pause and think, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because that person's just as, that's the thing about what Jesus said. He said to set the captive free and to bind up the brokenhearted. And sometimes the person in captivity is the one that created the broken heart, right?
Right.
And so you got to figure out how to minister to both of them.
At
And
the
that's a
same
real
time,
challenge.
it is.
Thank you for being with us today on this edition of One Single Story. Hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we look at another passage from our daily Bible reading.